That's what I'm going to call community board meetings from now on. Alrighty. We don't have quorum though, do we?
One short.
One shy of quorum, so we cannot vote, but we can go backwards. Judith is on the way. Did you hear from Eric at all? Okay, it is 6. It's a little past 6:15. We're going to start the meeting. This is the Battery Park City Committee of Community Board 1. Today is Wednesday, January 8th. On the agenda, we have the residential memorial plaque placement as the first item. If we come to needing to do a resolution, we are one shy for quorum. So my advice is that we move that down. I do know that Judith is on the way, so we'll wait for her to come for quorum. So we're going to start with the 2010 amendment to the BBCA settlement agreement, which we have slides. So, a slide? No, you have 6 slides.
No, Nico only wanted me to use the up-to-date language you sent me.
But I sent you the others.
I have it. I'll load the others up.
Yep. So we'll wait a minute while we have the other slides loaded, which will explain what the memo of understanding is. What our goal is in 2020 is to have the community better informed of how the finances with the Battery Park City Authority work, how that relates to what we pay and do here, and what public engagement portions there are within the framework. So there's a lot of conversation in recent months and years about the amount that is over for the revenues that are collected that are given back to the city and state. And part of this is a conversation where there is an amendment to the rules from the Battery Park City with a memo of understanding for a certain portion of money that goes back to the city and what it is required to be used for, and the requirement of Battery Park City Authority to pay funds into this bucket, for lack of a better word, until that debt is satisfied. So I've got some fun, yeah, there we go. All right, awesome. I've got some fun, cool slides. Some people may have seen them. I pulled them off of the March 2018 Open Community Board meeting. There was a lot of information there, but some of it is very relevant today. So let's kind of go down this road as soon as we get that up. So the settlement agreement and this is between the city, meaning the city and the controller's office, between the state controller and the Battery Park City Authority. So this is not like we can say, hey, we want this, and one person waves a wand and says, yes, let's get it done. So the owner of the lease, basically your pilots, this is a portion where it goes. So the remaining funds after your debt, your repair, maintenance, and other operating expenses are split between the city's general fund and the joint purpose fund. So once the Battery Park City Authority has paid their ops and their debt services, the remaining funds get split. The 2010 amendment said that this fund is only designated for specific things that the mayor, the controller, and the authority have deemed appropriate. Now, as a community board, our connection is with the city for the mayor's office and the controller's office, which is why it's important to have this dialogue and conversation, because if we do have something to opine, and we do have something to say, and we would like some level of public engagement, then we should all understand what this is and then talk to our appropriate agencies. All right? So there were 4 buckets for the joint purpose fund. The first one was $200 million to the general fund, New York State, $200 million to the New York City general fund, $200 million for affordable housing. That was not in Battery Park City. That is for the city to use wherever. And then a New York City capital fund, for which is $261 million that they are now still paying into. So you can tell when we're talking about 10 years later from the original agreement where the funds are going. So how is the money allocated? Again, these slides are pulled from the 2017 fiscal year as presented to the Community Board 2018. You take a look about the pilot. If you look at revenues versus transfers to the city, the transfer to the city for the pilot is about 66%, and about 20% goes to what they call the fund.
What fund? Minimum purpose fund, you mean, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
To satisfy,
The joint purpose fund.
yeah, to satisfy the debt. So this one is the hardest one to read. And I
I'll try to
apologize.
zoom that in.
He's going to try and zoom, but what this one, and the reason why it's the hardest to read, it is taken directly off the Battery Park City website. If you would like to read the entire 45-page 2018 fiscal year annual report, it is fascinating reading. However, this is the 4-year projection for revenues. So you can take a look down and, whoops, go back. There you go. So if you take a look, this is where we are in 2020, proposed through 2022. I'm going to have Eric talk a little bit about how much money is left to fund, when their anticipated timeline is for fulfilling that. But in the bottom, it's about 197 million projected for this year of overage that gets split out. Next year is 201 million and 205 in 2022. Again, these are, I am short estimates. I am not saying that I am presenting this as gospel. This is what I took off the website. I represent no truth in facts. I represent what I find.
Yeah, no.
All right? So, no offense intended to the Battery Park City Authority.
Question at this point, just for clarification.
Uh-huh.
So is there any amount, and maybe Eric's going to answer this, is there any amount in specific that must 100% be in writing given in that, in this, go down just a bit, in this category?
Yes.
Is there a figure that has to be given, like a sum total?
Well, let's introduce Eric. Let's have him go through the remaining information that we know thus far. And the goal is really for us to be educated and informed. So when we do a full financial presentation with the Battery Park City Authority in our meeting, we can chip away so to have people go back to the buildings, be able to be a little bit better informed instead of starting at 0, because then the meetings are 5 hours long, people get frustrated, and no one has time for Q&A at the end because they're like, okay, I'm done. So, we're trying to take this little bits by bits for chunks for the community, which also will help us work on a relationship and pipeline of communication with the authority that is a little bit more targeted.
And the controller's office.
Yes.
I
And
also would
there's
just
some.
like to say for the record that how many buildings, condo buildings are represented here besides 200 Rector?
300
300 Rector? Anybody else? You?
It's okay. Not worried.
were rental gateways.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's important, but no, it matters.
Rental at Gateway applies as well because it has to go towards,
Of course, no, but it matters.
The
and I wanna
landlord
say
pays
on
the pilot.
record that I think that the homeowners coalition is dropping the ball by not having representatives here from every one of the 18 buildings to hear about this, because this is exactly what they need to know. So when you talk to your friends who live in different buildings, I sure as heck would be making a fuss about saying, where are my representatives?
we also have a
coming to
condo
these
building in the north represented.
meetings? We do, yes, that way, yeah, which is great. I don't know how many of
And another rental building, so
which is good, but the condo buildings, it's a strong
it
push.
affects all of us, including the retail locations,
It
because the
definitely does.
residences are not the only ones who pay. Brookfield also pays, Goldman Sachs pays, and since
Everybody,
Goldman Sachs
yeah.
owns the hotel, they're commingled there too.
100%.
But the one funny thing I don't know, Eric, is does the city of New York pay pilot for Stuyvesant? Okay.
Because they don't pay pilot for well, they don't pay taxes for any school, do they, or do they?
Yeah, they get they're not on the tax roll, city properties aren't on the tax
Okay.
roll.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Alrighty, so we want to welcome Eric Munson. He's graciously here instead of Nick, which means let's not beat him up. Let's be nice.
That's right,
Well, I
be
can read out
kind.
Nick.
Where do you want me?
Wherever you're comfortable,
Great
wherever you
point.
can explain.
Yeah, I
point.
think rather than go over the slides, and I have the specific numbers if you want to talk about the
Yes.
specific numbers,
Yeah.
but because I think it's important to note that next month at the February meeting, Pam Frederick, our CFO, will do a full presentation with our Chief Executive Officer, BJ Jones, and that's when we can get into the specifics. But for the purposes of this discussion, it probably makes more sense to talk sort of more conceptually about the way that we're structured and in the sort of overall numbers, sort of chunking them off into the various buckets. So, Lucian, if it's all right, I'd rather, go back to that, the cylinder slide with the pie
Good
chart.
to this long slide?
Great.
Betty has a question.
Yeah.
By February, you mean the Battery Park City Authority meeting, not this meeting?
No, I mean
No,
this committee
it is
meeting.
at February
That's right.
5th, Battery Park City Committee meeting. the first
They are
Wednesday
going
in
to
That's right.
present the
February.
financials in
Here,
our
this
meeting.
one, yeah.
Because that will let people in my building know.
Yes.
Please.
And
Get a much larger of a venue.
We will be at a larger venue.
Tell me what's
And to Tammy's point, we do have an extensive annual report where we're legally required to post it on our website, and so you can read it. The staff is hard at work putting it together right now, and they work really, really hard and do a terrific job at it. So don't just read the financial stuff, read about our accomplishments and the work that we have ongoing. We also, as an effort of both BJ and myself and others, we take pains to show where we have room for improvement as well, and so you can check that out and see if it aligns with what your understanding of where we can improve as well. But as it pertains to the budget, if you think, again, don't quote me on the specific numbers because I'm intentionally going to round, but if you think of the monies that's collected across all of the residential and commercial buildings as $300 million over the course of a year, chunk that off into two different parts. One of it is ground rent, right, which is a little more complicated in that we own all the land on which Battery Park City was originally built. And then we have leases with the master owners. So like at Gateway, it's the LaFrac organization. We have a lease, basically, that they can develop a property on the ground that we've rented to them, and they pay us in exchange ground rent. So that's a small percentage in the grand scheme of the pie of what we collect from, say, for instance, the LaFrac organization. The larger part, I think it's like 87% or something like that, is pilot, payment in lieu of taxes. So instead of thinking of pilot, think of it as just taxes. It's assessed the same way the taxes are assessed in the city. I used to work at the Department of Finance. You can take the market value, multiply it by the assessment. Anyway, we can go into all those details if you want.
Yes, but
okay.
let's do the overview
Yes.
first.
But in short, we collect on the city's behalf the payment in lieu of taxes revenue and the ground rent revenue, and we put it into this big pot. From that pot, we then take our operating expenses, which in broad strokes is around $38 million a year, and then we pay our debt service, so all of our bond financing to pay for the capital projects that Gwen Dawson and our shop manages.
And how much is that about?
I think it's in the category of $90 million.
90.
Please hold. Debt service, 83.7, rounded. And so we have those two considerations taken care of. So we take what we need for our operating expenses, which is approved by our board of directors, our 7 members of the board. And then we have the capital plan, which is authorized by the city. And so the city signs off on all the projects we do and enables us to issue debt for those things. And when they allow us to issue the debt, they recognize that as a result of issuing the debt, the cost of that debt may fluctuate. So from those two buckets, operating expenses, debt service, we now have excess revenues to the city, and that brings us to this slide. And so last year it was like 100 and, how much was it? It was 100.
7 is what you look like.
2019 or 2018?
195.1 last year. And so we were slightly under, I guess, depending on how you perspective. We generated more money to send to the city than we expected by about $3 million. And so that money goes to the city. The city takes some of it for the joint purpose fund and others for, it goes all to the joint purpose fund.
All the excess goes into the joint purpose.
That's right. But I think it's worth noting, just give me one second. I think it's worth noting that before the city takes theirs, we proverbially get ours.
Right.
And in exchange for the monies that we send to the city, we get essential city services like sewer systems and police and fire and EMS services and all those other
Which
things.
is what taxes pay.
That's right. Right. And so the payment in lieu of taxes, also known as the tax revenue, pays the same as if you were across Route 9A paying as you would a regular tax.
So if I could ask.
Sorry, Matt was first.
But that's
if you
okay.
wanna-
Well,
You
Matt
guys
has
can
to.
fight about it later.
No, Matt has to wait because we do, as we do with Robert's rules with every meeting, the committee goes first for questions. We will recognize everybody in the public who would like to speak
getting
and
in the
has a
middle of
question. Yeah, no, that's what I get to do.
Fair.
So, Matt, you gotta wait.
I do what I'm told.
Yep, but first let's wait and see if Eric's done.
Oh,
How much more do you want?
well, a lot more, but yeah.
Yeah, so let's you go through
From there,
where
why
we
don't
are
we have
first.
some more questions? Yeah,
You
sorry.
got it.
Yeah.
So,
It's just the one question,
Yeah.
which is there, so if you go into this capital fund and the joint purpose fund, is there any amount, it's we're going with that figure of 300 million, of which we just, figured out that we are keeping 123 million in Battery Park City. So somebody who's not me, do the math. That level of 200 and whatever, 77 million.
Yeah.
Is there any requirement as to what that figure is every year from us?
No.
It could be, if we were assuming that the city and everybody else who has to agree to let you do bond debt service, if they agreed to let you jack it all up and operate expenses up to 250 million, we're good, and they're good. If they've all agreed in advance during the years, we're good giving them 50 million.
Yeah, I wouldn't want
If
to
they
speak, I wouldn't want to speak for
No,
them, but,
if,
yeah,
if.
that's right.
Yeah.
I mean, and of course, some of the folks in this room may remember times when the numbers were not $200 million, when, the neighborhood was barely tenable, and folks had concerns that it was going to be a viable place to live and work and develop. And so now we're on the other side of it, and it's a colossal cash cow for the city, and they don't want to kill that cow.
No, well, yeah, I guess my comment to that is 300 million is enough, which is what I've said before, but
Okay,
I'm
well,
opening
let's wait.
up, and I've got questions, but I'm waiting.
300 million is enough for what? I don't know.
Total my question, answer that is 300 million collected is enough, not 300 million to the city. I'm saying that when we're gonna put in there the ground rent, because Eric said the ground rent, the pilot, and there's a civic fee that also is the small little crap that we pay also. Those are the three things that they collect from Battery Park City. All that, I'm saying that amount, 300 million is enough. We're done. We're all living here now. We've paid 300 million more. When we look at the slide that has it, they've collected 300 million at least last year and this year. If you look at the number, we'll just develop those numbers, okay? I'm saying that's enough.
You don't want to give money to capital.
No, and I want us to
So the
freeze
net,
whatever has to be
the net
frozen.
excess revenue is one of the things that we need to focus on. Not on the collection necessarily, because the collection is also dependent on net excess. You can't talk about one without the other, especially when we have debt to satisfy. So, well, wait. So for 2019, the excess revenues are about 195, of which if 20% goes to this fund as it has in the past, the numbers that they were talking about is 41 million going to joint purpose, which left about 48 million left, right? Those are the numbers I got from Nick today.
I'm
40,
confused with
so
that.
if there's
Yeah, I
100,
don't get what we
if
got.
there's 195 extra,
That he said goes to joint purpose fund.
all right, that's
It
the
goes to
excess
city's
revenue
general
total,
fund and to the
Right.
joint purpose.
right?
So we got one, let's
But,
go-
hold on,
okay,
of
yeah.
which the joint purpose fund takes about 21% of it, which is about 41 million. Because there's a division, if you took a look at the slide, there's the,
But they're full.
look at the slide of
That-
that one. So
Oh.
there
It
are
also goes to
that-
two
we-
buckets that
like-
come out.
Justine, like tax revenue would go to the general
Got it,
fund to
got
pay
it.
for city services.
Right.
Got it.
So 79, 80% goes to that, and then a smaller 21% goes to the joint purpose fund buckets that we're filling along,
That's the margin of flow.
right? So that's the margin of discussion that we're talking about, because you gotta pay the city for the services that we have. That's just what that is, right?
Except that figure is not fixed, is what Eric is saying. It's
So
not a
the-
fixed amount,
The
and that's why,
the pilot number, it's not fixed in that the assessed value of the properties could fluctuate, and as a result, if a property declines in value over the course of many years, it would be reflected in its assessed value and would be taxed less if you multiply the tax rate by the assessed value of the property. But I would say overall, the city is expecting these funds. Right, yeah.
clearly. And they're.
So when we're talking about enough, we have to take a look about what money is really in play. There's some money that's in play without a doubt, and there's some things that we can opine on as a community board and say to the city, first of all, you're collecting this extra, let's just round it up, 50 million a year, 40 million, 50 million a year, that goes into your joint purpose fund. We'd like to freeze, or we'd like to, whatever it is, there's a memo of understanding what it's for that's going to be fulfilled within the next year, year and a half. So we should be thinking as a community and having productive dialogue about what we can work with the city on. And there's no saying that we can't have an opinion on what that fund is for. Maybe we say, you know what? We'd like to take some of that money and send it into paying for resiliency. Right? We've talked about why do we have to pay for resiliency all the way over?
Instead of doing the capital budget fund, we pay it from here.
But I guess, just real quick though, don't forget, all that money comes out after we've
I
paid
know.
for all those other things. So we're really, like, all of our needs, like, from a capital plan perspective and from an operating budget perspective, have already been satisfied. So to say we're gonna take the excess revenues and use them to pay for the resiliency stuff, as opposed to getting well-financed bonds, I think it's probably to our and to the city's own detriment.
Can you go to the last slide, which shows about debt? Okay. So there's always been conversations about debts and how it works. And it's harder if you're a renter to understand how this filters down to you. But at the same way, like with anything else, if your landlord gets a massive increase in whatever his taxes are or anything else, they filter that back down to rent. Sometimes they don't, and they just filter the increase in rent and profit.
Yeah.
That's business. But the thing is, the authority debt doesn't affect the pilot or the base, but it does affect the amount available to make transfers to the city and state from the revenues. That's where I think that we have conversation to be had around with the homeowners coalition, with everything, as a community to have a conversation.
I have a bigger conversation for you, Tammy, that I want to challenge our community board and community board one to take the stand on. And this jumps a little bit off of what Eric's saying. But my challenge is to attack the pilot, because it affects every condo and co-op in Manhattan. So that's
In the city.
in Manhattan.
Preponderantly Manhattan, but yes,
Preponderantly Manhattan.
it's class 2 residences.
So what the law states now for taxes, so forget pilot as a separation, because we just, as Eric said, we are just subjected to the same thing, so taxes. Real estate taxes for condos and co-ops in New York State is 6% annual increase a year that's allowable. Doesn't mean they have to increase your 6%, but they can. Cut that back to class 2 condos and co-ops in Manhattan, because that's what I'm focusing on now, is Manhattan. That is an unlimited amount, okay? Unlimited, not 6%. Class 1 homes, which are private homes, little picket fence, whatever, every place in New York State, the taxes can be increased 2% annually. That's it. We have unlimited. Now, I can say, and Julie, correct me if I'm incorrect, because she's one of the.
What about Eric?
Sorry.
No, he won't know this information.
No, that's not, there's a 6% cap on class 1 properties.
There is not.
Yes.
Ours has,
This one is the.
We're not class 1, we're class 2.
oh, yeah, oh,
On class 1.
Yeah.
There was, on the picket fence house is
Yeah.
a 6% cap.
What's the cap for this building, or buildings like this?
'Cause
Zero.
we are
There's no
class
cap
two, I
whatsoever.
We're class
No,
two.
there's a cap on
No,
it.
No, there's
no,
not. There's just a
there is-
segue where they have to
Yeah.
phase in, but no, there is no cap.
But the
We've
reason
been
I'm
over this
asking
with our
Julie is
cert attorneys.
I want to hear from her on the record, because I really shouldn't be providing it, but Liberty Court's taxes, pilot, have
24%
increased
since,
27%?
I'm not sure,
it's
but
24 since 2017 is my understanding.
Okay,
250 Rector is
24%.
up 30% in the same interval.
Since 2017.
Sorry.
That is not 6%.
This will get wonky quick, but the rate can increase as much as the city council and
That's
the
my
mayor
point.
choose. But the assessed value of the property stays,
No, it
has
does
to
not.
stay within the cap.
No.
It does.
It's not,
No.
that's not what's
The
happening.
cert
with us.
attorneys went over this with us like for hours, and
and what it can get phased in over time, you know.
Time as in
But 5 years, you know, but it's not like a private residence where the assessment can't be more than, you know, 6%.
This is bigger than just Eric
Yeah.
and the Battery Park City Authority.
yeah, it's actually not Battery
I
Park City
would like
specific.
to have this community board take it on and try to make condos and co-ops in Manhattan, all of New York City, whatever. Let's narrow down the focus and get the facts straight,
Ahead of the next meeting?
but narrow it down that there is a cap. Because the other little quirk in the way that things are evaluated is what Eric is mentioning about the, with the condo buildings and the co-ops, the taxes are based on the assessed value of the building. Condos and co-ops in Manhattan, at least, that's what I can speak to, are assessed as if they were rental properties and assessed on the basis of what local rental properties are getting in rent increases. So as gateways, for example.
What their rental income is.
Income.
So this is
Would
what
be.
the income for the
So
building would be, based on what they say you're equal to.
Two. Okay,
Which is an
but
imaginary figure.
Co-ops and condos are not getting income. We are owning our home and putting money down and being subjected to the same expenses that the Class 1 homeowner is expected to. And you can rest assured that no Class 1 homeowner is going to be able to jump into a home in 1950, buy their house, and then have their taxes increase at the rate, an unlimited rate based on the value. If you did that, people would not be in their
So,
homes.
That is,
And that's
that
what's
is,
happening to us
that is a
now.
global CB1
Yes,
thing,
and I'm,
if that's what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying.
Which then would come out of, not in this commit, our purview
Okay.
in this committee
is Battery Park.
is
Yeah.
Battery Park City
Okay.
Authority. If we said, gee, you know what? We'd like to start with state-owned property land
We could start
in
there, but
control
it's
of the
not
Battery
gonna-
Park City Authority,
it's not
listen to
enough.
me, then it can start here. If not, it needs to go through the Housing Committee for all of CB1,
Okay.
because that involves all landowners,
Agreed. We
east
need
to
to-
west, south of Canal, who we represent.
We need to do that, Lucian, so if I can sit
Yeah,
with you
that's
do it.
certainly something that I'm sure Pat would be more than
Right.
happy.
So, I mean,
Pat Murphy?
no, not that bad.
Not that bad.
Pat Moore.
Pat
So,
Moore,
but that's something that we can definitely take on. Our
Now let's
purview
focus on
here
this,
is to
yes.
focus on how we work with the authority and how the, the authority
Yes.
is bound by the rules of, I guess, the city and state, so. But, I mean, I would assume that Roosevelt Island has the same kind of assessment. I don't know that, but boy, am I gonna find
Are
out.
they rentals or condos there? Are there
Yes.
They're ground
Both.
lease, just like
They're
this.
ground lease like we
and
are.
it's both, condos and
And they
rentals.
elect the board of directors of the Roosevelt Island Operating Corporation.
Yeah.
But so they have the same structure then?
The
same
governor
issues
only
we
appoints
have.
one of their board, just saying.
Yeah. But, so then back to this then, so basically what you're saying is where we have to room to play is the 21%?
That's, I think, where we have room to opine, specifically targeted to the land lease. And the question, I mean, I want Jeff to go next, but one of the things that we need to take a look at is, as hard as the condos and renters are, the condo owners are getting it, the renters are getting it
Yes.
because there absolutely is no method to the madness here.
Correct.
And once the buildings have rolled out of 421A, I'll use 70 Battery as a classic example. It's happened in the north side, it's happened in the south side. We have lost every bit of stabilized housing that we've had to an unprecedented level, different than anywhere else in New York City. We've had the greatest loss. And the problem is, once it gets rolled out, the landlord certainly doesn't want a tenants association to try and campaign the Battery Park City Authority, which is what each building would end up having to need. But there are people who need help, even in buildings that have gone condo, like 225 Rector, which has some rental people still in.
I think there's a couple reasonable questions that we can ask of the comptroller's office, as they're the oversight over how the budget is implemented, how cities are using, how the agencies are using their money. I think a reasonable question that we can ask them is, of these different buckets that have been filled by the overage, by the excess, what percentage of that, if this is something that they can calculate, has been spent in the district, or more specifically within Battery Park City? Because it would be interesting to know of what is produced, how much comes back. I think that's a reasonable question to ask.
I would suggest that a reasonable ask, a request rather than a request for information, is how about you get them to come here and agree that they will consult with this committee and this board before they ever sign one of these settlement agreements again. At the very least, even if the board says, we hate you, we're going to burn you in effigy, they will have informed the board and provided information
Don't
by
laugh,
consulting.
that's a direction we can go, but what we
Yes.
really want to do, and the reason why we're having this discussion here tonight, is to educate the people who are here. So when you come to the next
Sure.
Battery Park City Authority presentation on the financials, everybody is in better shape to understand. And then in March, we can have that discussion because until they fill the buckets, we've got nothing to say because it's a done deal. But let's be realistic,
Let's
once the
plan
bucket
ahead.
is we need to look ahead.
Don't even wait that long. The governor is facing a $6 billion deficit right now. I guarantee you there is some bean counter in the executive chamber eyeing the books of this agency, wondering how much he can rob from this community, like tonight. And their plan would be to announce that and present it as a fait accompli after the fact, you know. Gee, we never heard from you, so we just went
I
ahead.
think the discussions need to start now. I mean, and maybe they're already happening, I don't know. But we need to start now, and we want to get on the record with the resolution, I think, at the very least saying the community board and the community wants to be part of the next settlement agreement, the discussions of it.
Which settlement
Let's
agreement
let-
are you talking about? Can we?
The 20% buckets of buckets of where
The
that
joint
money is
purpose
going
fund.
from the joint.
Which dates to the original?
2010. The state and city amended it.
Madam Chair, Betty wants to.
No, we're gonna go Jeff, because he's been patient. Betty, I'm sorry, I didn't see you raising your hand behind my shoulder. Jeff and then
So I
Betty.
have a few naive questions and observations. So one is what is the settlement, sort of your question, what is this a settlement about? What's being settled? What happened? What's
So I think it's more about the
It's-
tension between the city, the state, and BPCA in terms of who's getting the money, for lack of a better term. So it's just an agreement.
But you're saying there's not even a real agreement. It's like you guys collect some money.
No, there's
No.
an
There's
official memo of understanding that was done as a 2010 amendment
To what?
To
to
original
settlement.
the bylaws
What
of,
settlement?
I
the
can help with
bylaws
that.
of
Historically,
BPCA.
there was a dispute between the city and the state. The city theoretically owns out to the bulkhead line, the state owns out to the pierhead line. And they had to resolve that because you couldn't create an agency that governed half of the 92 acres and then the other entity. So the settlement agreement was a handshake about, basically it said the city would get the money and the state would get the control. The state would always be in charge, but the city would get
But
the
in
checks.
there, and in
Okay.
that settlement agreement, which, it's a contract, there's no, there was, I don't believe it was a court problem.
No,
It's
no,
not
it was
a court
a-
decree,
it
it
was-
was a contract that was decided way back in the 80s or the 90s.
Late 70s, I
Oh,
think.
better.
The first one.
That contract has been what they've used to figure out how that joint purpose fund, and the general fund, and how the money is spent.
Okay.
and so the
So-
last time that it was updated was 2010.
Exactly.
They didn't put a limit on, meaning you gotta do this within 10 years. What they did was said, here's the goal
800 million.
of these buckets, and Battery Park City Authority has been sending money and filling the buckets. We're at the point that we're at the last bucket, and the estimation is it'll be filled within 2 years, right, Eric?
Well, it was 2 years last year.
Yeah, I think next year I would expect.
Right. So that means that
So wait,
the city and state will
Why is there still
have.
money to go into the buckets if we're taking in excess money every year?
Because as Tammy was saying, with the joint purpose funds, this is what I broke it out. The 195 million that Tammy said is excess. 21 or 20% of it goes into the joint purpose fund, which is the buckets that we're talking about, the settlement agreement buckets,
Fill in the bucket.
okay? The balance goes to the general purpose fund of New York City, and that pays for, those are
Just
really truly
regular
our taxes.
That's your regular
Like
taxes,
every
that's
other.
your
It's
sanitation,
OMB,
that's
it's
your
partitioning out to all the
Department of
cities.
Transportation, yeah.
And there's no set amount that has to be, is what you're saying.
What I'm saying is that it's set the same way that taxes are set elsewhere in the city.
20%.
But you were saying earlier, there's not one set number that they're saying you owe us this money. It's sort of whatever's left over, you give it to us.
That is,
Sorry.
So you
So
initially
we-
said
right, we
that
collect
they
all the
want that
pilot
money, but there's not
and-
the amount they say you've got to give us.
Right.
Percentages.
Sorry.
So that gets me to my next naive question, which is, if we're taking in more than we need to take in to fulfill our obligations, why wouldn't we just reduce ground rents so that people are paying less ground rent? Why are we
We're asking
paying-
the
why
same
are we-
question.
Why is that still happening? And also, I just want to point out a fundamental tension that I'm not an economist, I'm a school teacher, but it seems like building owners want the minimum rents of the building, like my building that I rent. Like, they want to be able to list on my lease the highest possible minimum rent every month that I have to pay. Whether they charge it to me or not, they want to have that. That's fundamental. LaFrac definitely wants the rents to be listed as high as possible.
Yeah.
Because then their building has a greater asset if they want to sell it. They can say, if you want to buy this building, you can charge $5,600 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment or whatever it might be.
10,000.
Right.
So that's a fundamental tension between the renter and the owner.
Right.
And that, I don't know how that gets established, but that number is incredibly important to renters like me and owners numbers too.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're an owner, you want that number to be higher because you can sell your apartment to someone and say, hey, you can rent it tomorrow for a lot more money. But if you're a renter like me, you want that number as low as possible, especially like me in a rent stabilized building where they could go to that amount and then plus. So.
Well, and the
so
other
point
thing
that
is
out. But
it's
the bigger thing I was gonna say
oxymoronic.
is why are we're collecting all this excess money? And some people choose not to own down here because it's $2 a square foot common charges versus $1 like the rest of the city. As a result, property values are cheaper, from what I've been able to glean. But
It's less expensive to buy on the other side of the West Side Highway for similar,
Yeah, because you actually own it.
well, you actually
You actually
pay
own-
less, I think, on the other side of the highway
You
for
do.
the same amount of space.
Yep.
Because you got to factor in $2 a square foot versus $1, 100 yards that way. So, and the rest of the city's about $1 a square foot for a common charge, and a condo over here it's $2. So like my apartment, if I owned it, would be $2,200 a month before I even got to my mortgage.
right.
Right, because I have an 1,100 square foot, one two-bedroom apartment. So, I guess my naive question is, why don't we do something about the amount we're taking in and not charge as high a ground rent?
Thank you, that's my
That's
point of
what we're
300
looking at,
million
that's the
is enough.
conversation to be had, because at the same time, the landlord keeps raising rents because their rents are going up, so do they
Well,
say.
their costs
But they
are
also want to charge more rent because it increases their value.
And
So it-
conversely, though, you can throw this in the picture,
Yeah,
the valuation of every condo building
it's
is
different.
linked to the rental buildings. The
Yes.
higher the
Theoretically.
rental buildings are, the more taxes we pay, but we are not getting any income.
Which is
And our
why rent
value-
stabilization all the way through
Yes, it's
to
good
keep
for
a
us.
cap is good for everybody.
But so you understand that means the value of my apartment is going down. So I keep getting things from Zillow once a month. We're down now about maybe 15% from last year in terms of
This is
price, sales price.
Does anyone know what the status of the property tax reform movement is? I haven't checked.
I think it's lost a lot of steam. I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of
It's
intent
a
to-
non-starter because they're seeking relief through the courts. It really is a legislative fix in Albany, not in the city.
And I think that
And I
as
think
a
the
legislative
troublemaker
body,
over there
we
is-
need to do it.
There's a lawsuit going through the courts, but the lawsuit is based on discrimination, saying
Yeah.
that it discriminates against minorities.
The
so
former
it doesn't
commissioner
solve
of
the
Department
difference
of Finance
between
filed.
Oh, wow.
single or 1 to 3 family homes and condos and co-ops.
Right.
So I don't know if you know, but what would the mechanism be to propose that we decrease ground rents?
I think you folks have lobbied hard
Yeah, I
for,
mean, we've been
for
doing democracy
decreasing.
through EPC, has
We've
been
heard you
screaming
loud and
about
clear.
it.
I mean,
Is that
what I
yours?
try to
Is
keep
it
in
your
mind in the
decision?
back of my head.
Not your, but is
No.
it the authority's decision, the city's
No,
decision,
go
the
back to
state's
the picture
decision,
with the three
elected's
people.
decisions? Who would be able to wave some wand to make that happen?
So I'd say a few things. Let me see if I can remember all by the time I'm done with my, what I promised would be a short spiel. But the initial idea behind this neighborhood was a third luxury housing, a third middle income housing, and a third affordable housing.
Yes.
And then when the financial crisis hit, they needed to incentivize developers to develop here. They sort of did away with the idea of making this neighborhood mixed income, made it more or less a quote-unquote luxury neighborhood with the idea that they would incentivize the development of affordable housing elsewhere.
Right.
In this BPCA administration, we're trying to right what we perceive to be that wrong, right? And so through the ground lease renegotiation process, we hope to be able to increase affordable housing across the neighborhood, right? As a result, though, the neighborhood ground lease master tenants come to us and they say, we'd like to, if you want more affordable housing in this neighborhood, we'd like to pay less in ground rent. And so that's
Obviously.
right. So that's a normal sort
Lower
of
your cost.
term of negotiation, right? And so the authority is committed to pursuing affordable housing in the neighborhood to try to adjust that going forward. But I can't tell you anything specific about the negotiations or about specific properties or anything, but we've made it very clear, you can read our strategic plan as it pertains to the goal to try to make this a more inclusive community economically.
So the question that we need to figure out from a community board perspective is, we can holler all we want, but we need to try and put in place some resolutions to get them to the state controller, the city controller, and find the most effective way to support the movement Yes, we can do petitions. Yes, we can try and, our goal to get 14,000 people to sign. Movement in the governmental agencies in their,
Oh, you mean a movement,
AP.
not a
movement.
movement, people just like moving with their
No,
policy.
no, no.
no, a movement that we can actually make positive progress to try and look at the revenues, look at affordability, and rebalance Battery Park City. That, I mean, my concern is that we will end up like Park Avenue, where it is many empty buildings with lots of foreign ownership because it's extremely high. There's been a bit of a change. We don't want to take anything away from anybody. We just want to try and find a way to balance it so that the owners are happy overall, and that there's a stratified community.
Yeah, boy, you make me really nervous. I know a lot of people sitting like me who are on the verge of being forced out of their units
Right.
because we are the lucky ones. We're going to subsidize affordable so other people can come in.
Which is,
Which means you have to get ready because everyone's going to start moving around.
But we don't-
Just give me the affordable place, they can have my place and pay the big
no,
money.
we don't want to do that. What we want to do is
But that's the concern. That's my point.
Why is that a concern?
we don't want you to leave.
Explain how that would look in your building. To make you move out to make your unit affordable, how did that happen?
Because if the ground lease goes up in my building, it's not a matter of them
We're
targeting
talking
me as
about
much as.
reducing the whole point here is that we're all in this together. And if the ground rent and the ground lease payments go down, which is what we're asking for, that will benefit both the renters
Right, no, if that's the
and-
assumption. The comment was from Eric was to bring in more affordable housing.
Wait, you're leaving because
So
you're
you're
mad at us?
clarifying that, it's not saying some buildings are more affordable and some are gonna be less affordable. You're talking about all of them are gonna get cheaper than they are now.
Get that?
I would say that if we could get back to an overall, more balanced community, that would be
But what's balanced?
ideally. However, I don't think that that's a realistic expectation. I would expect, particularly among the condo owners, that the condo owners will continue to be owners of their units.
Maybe.
And
But if they can afford it,
taxes
yeah,
are
they can
so
afford
much
them.
we can't afford
We
it.
can't afford it. I mean, so what you need to hear is really clearly, we cannot
Sit here.
afford to stay in our homes as condo owners because the taxes are going up exponentially. And it's not about cutting out a doorman or trying to say we're gonna have the, we're putting revolving doors. It's about the friggin' taxes. And it's not just the ground rent, it's the taxes. And thanks to BJ and thanks to you all for showing us this. Because at first we thought it was the ground rent. I certainly did. It is the ground rent, yes, but the ground rent is a piece of it. It's the taxes. Matthew, if I can call on you.
Sure. When you said the condo owners will remain the condo owners, so if costs continue to go up, and let's say 60% of everybody who owns a condo here is forced out, but somebody else comes in and buys those condos, without trying to put words in your mouth, if I'm sitting in your seat, that sounds to me like no problem.
I'm sorry.
Let's not do doomsday.
Yeah,
That-
Why
no,
not?
we're there,
That's what we're
Tammy.
facing.
Well,
there.
I think, and I just walked in, but Justine and I have talked about this topic extensively, so I think I know where we're going. But I think, it's a great point, but I don't know who is buying it. Like, if we all get kicked out, I don't know who is buying it. Like,
Yeah.
because the expenses are so
You
high.
cannot meet the
when
expenses anymore, you're forced to
pay
liquidate.
the condo fees, and then you have to pay all of
Yeah.
these other fees. When we were buying our place, my husband said to me at the last minute, I don't know if I want to do this because we're buying an apartment and we're effectively paying rent on that apartment.
That will be
And it-
taken away from you in 2069.
So, I mean, I think at a certain point, there's nobody to buy them. You have to lower the price. If you want to sell,
Yeah.
you have to lower the price significantly in order to account for this person that's buying it having to pay all this money.
Let's point out to what we were talking about. We were talking about to rebalance the community, and my point was, if they create some places for lower income people, who's eating it? The condo owners are
Yes.
stuck with buying it to make it more affordable for those people of the future getting affordable. So
Why
they
would,
have to
why,
really look
why,
at it.
why does it have to be?
Someone's got to pay ground rent.
But we are already at the point that we have a significant overage. So there's a giant extra bucket. We are paying more than, by a large percentage, than's needed to do operations and debt service. The amount of remaining funds, even after you did the New York City General Fund, is huge.
But my question was, how is that divvied up? And I think we're all assuming different things.
Well, what do you
Some
mean,
are
how is it divvied
assuming
up?
it's gonna go into X buildings for affordable people,
No.
to bring them,
Oh, I see.
to do that. Others are saying, no, it's be evenly divided amongst everybody, so everybody's gonna get more control versus growth than what they currently have. I was asking for clarification on which is it, because I think we're all assuming our own scenario of
But
what
it has
that
to be
means more
equitable.
balanced.
It has
I
to be.
mean, we have to
equitable.
advocate for equity. We can't advocate for one over the other. That's
No,
just
But I
not
wonder
right.
what the BPCA is thinking.
Sorry. Ask the question.
When you said you
yeah.
want to, they're seeking, not you personally,
Yeah.
I mean you as a group, seeking to rebalance, I mean, going back to having low income as well as middle income. How do you do that, and what's the vision, given how many people already live here? You know, you're going to reallocate and say you're in a condo, so you can't be low income, so you have to be the one that subsidizes those people that are yet to move in, but we're going to create spaces for them?
No, I don't think that we're looking at the, oh, sorry. I don't think that we're looking at the portfolio and saying, like, if we are able to increase affordable housing in X building, that Y building should be paying more to make up the balance. I don't think we see it as zero sum.
Yeah,
But they won't be getting a break either. I mean, it would be an allocation of it, if they freeze the money collected.
that,
It still would be, if you're giving a lot to some target people you want to attract, that's less you can give to others.
which is why, once again, I go back to 300 million is enough. This is the pie. Let us make the pie finite. That's how much they collect. Then we can have, step one needs to be that. How much is collected by the Battery Park City Authority? It needs to be a finite number. Then you can sit down with the different constituents and do exactly what you're saying, do the homework that you're saying, Betty, because at the end of the day, you're right. I think nobody should pay a dime more than what they're paying now. I can
Right.
tell you,
All right, so
it's
stop.
very annoying to
All right,
have
so
to
stop.
consider paying more.
Absolutely. You've made your point. Betty's made her point. Jeff wants to say something.
Yeah.
Lucian wants to say something. You have to wait, Matt, because there are three other people in the
Sure.
audience.
The pressing point, which is, in some sense, my interests as a renter are directly in opposition to your interests as an owner.
Me.
Because if you want your place to be as valuable as possible, you want my rent to be as high as possible, so your place is worth more.
No,
money.
I don't.
Actually,
because-
they
because
don't.
what I explained
Hold on,
to you
hold
is-
on. Stop.
Explain it.
how that's not
She
the
doesn't
case.
necessarily want that. What they want, the reason why the values are dropping is because the costs are so high because of the anticipated escalations as well. Because if you buy in now, you could look and say, okay, if I lived in the Cove Club, my escalation is 12% a year for costs. That's no. If you read Jonathan's
okay.
newsletter, it says it's 12% this year.
Very
Very
concrete.
concrete.
Okay.
Right, so he's been very good about posting the different escalations for several buildings in the neighborhood, for 250 South End recently,
Right,
Cove
can
Club
you
and
pause
others,
For a second, why is it escalating 12% a year?
because that's the agreement they have with the Battery Park City Authority. And that's the problem, is there's an escalation that's not directly tied to the cost for maintenance of the building or other things. It's tied to an agreement on pilot, ground rent, etc.
Okay, so then to Eric, why, if you have this kind of idealistic hope in the future, would not you, but why would the authority want to be raising people 12%? I mean, that property is not going to be increasing in value 12%.
No.
Unless it's the,
Yeah, they can barely
unless
sell
it's
things
the,
as it is.
It's not.
the best market in the world. So like, why?
Yeah, I would want to take a look to see I haven't looked at this
Okay.
particular building's financials.
But you're going to concern for you guys to think about.
No, for sure. And I would say that how much of it is pilot related and how much of it is ground rent related. I don't know this 12%. And by the way, I'd like to apologize because I did misspeak earlier about the 6% cap on the class 2 properties. But I would imagine
Right.
that a significant percentage of that increase can be attributed to the increased pilot payments. And don't forget, the pilot payments, which when they're connected to the tax rate, when they're connected to taxes, it's really dividing up the levy, right? Like the city, because the city has greater expenses year over year, they're allocating it across the city. It's not like, because they're legally required to have a balanced budget, they say, oh, we're going to spend $98 billion this year, we need to find $98 billion in revenue, and then they adjust the tax rate accordingly.
That's what they do.
Right.
Yeah.
Right,
Well, they adjust the underlying, sorry.
yep.
That's right.
So I kind of summarize my point then.
Yes.
My point is simply that if there's an attempt to make more of a use the word you use early stratified or your word more middle up luxury inclusive, more diverse community economically.
I guess I do.
Then I mean that's a pretty difficult task. That means there's a lot of powers that you guys would have to sort of initiate that. But the one thing that's most, the one element you could take away that's most pressureful in terms of your desire to have your unit valued as highly as possible, and my desire to pay a lower rent so I can afford to stay here, is to not pile on another 12% or whatever it is to artificially amp up the amount of money people are losing for owners and being challenged to match as renters. Because not only is that not moving toward a more affordable, it's moving toward even the landed gentry are struggling, much less the lowly who lives in rent. So it's like kind of a no-brainer that you wouldn't want to have that added 12% on top of me competing to stay up to the value you want your unit to be assessed at, plus 12% more to keep you guys
It's not so much that owners want a higher assessment, they want lower costs, lower carrying costs.
So you do want your unit to be,
But you know what, the
But
value
really,
of
Yeah, if you're gonna raise your kids here and you wanna retire here, you care less about what it would fetch tomorrow than what it costs you to carry.
but there might.
I guarantee
No.
you. Most
the more
condo-
luxury this
Hold
neighborhood
on.
becomes, so let's be really clear.
Yes, well, that's
The
true.
more luxury the community, look how dark the building across the street is. I know it's not here. That's because of foreign ownership. But that's the story of New York City. Don't we all understand that? Foreign people buying up properties that have tons of money. They don't ever stay there, and it jacks up the prices of everyone around them. So you might want to stay here and retire. There's definitely, the more newer and the more luxury the building is in our neighborhood, I would argue there's definitely probably a higher rate of foreign ownership.
You don't
They
have-
also
There
have an
isn't too
asset in New York City that they can
There may
bank
not-
and income.
But-
All right, hold on.
Not live in, not retire, and not raise kids in.
So I
Own property
can
or
speak
land.
from the school perspective because PS 89 had a massive drop in enrollment when buildings condoized in the north end. There were
Because they go to
two
private school.
Well,
There were two buildings in the north end that were, for lack of a better expression, gutted from renters. People were forced to leave. They were renovated. One of the buildings decreased the
stole our
number of
first
units. And they both went condo.
And they shrank it.
And PS 89 saw a marked decrease in enrollment, not because any other reason other than the building condo prices and what was there for sale were so much higher than the rental market had been
That's not
that it
true in my
wasn't
building though.
in your building, but you're one building. I'm talking there were
But
three
you're saying
other
my two
buildings.
neighbors are that different. I don't think they are because the people aren't that different. A lot of them left for very specific reasons. They wanted their kids out of PS 89 and they moved them.
But that is one family. I'm talking about
What is this?
or two families. I'm
Two
talking
raised
about
42
a
children.
marked change for that school that went from a waiting list, a long waiting list, to needing people to be there. Okay, and that overnight change coincided directly with the closing of the two buildings. It's not like it was with anything else. It directly correlated timing-wise.
Need security
that.
and stability.
What year was that?
I'd have to go back and look, because
276 opened up around the same time. and there
No,
was-
this was
No,
after
no, no.
that. It was
This
way
is
after that. But two things to say. Remember what I said at the beginning about how the pilot is assessed on the condos in Manhattan, and maybe in a place else, but in Manhattan. The condos are assessed on the rental values. At the end of the day, my taxes go down when your rent goes down. So my costs go down when your rent goes down. The higher your rent is, the more they're saying my building is worth, but it's not, because my value is going down,
Except, let me
because my
just-
costs are going down.
Let
All
me
right.
just say this, they changed the tax rate to
Right.
come up with the nut that they need. So if our value goes down, they're gonna raise our tax rate, so, it's 14% next year.
All right.
A lot of
So-
us have our
They're always
taxes.
balanced.
Yeah.
They're balanced.
exactly.
Double-digit percentage every
Okay.
year.
Taxes go up.
let's,
All right.
anybody else from the audience, other than Matt, that would like to speak, have anything to add?
Well, ask
So-
questions.
Question. One, wait, you're two. 1, 2. Go for it.
More of a statement. The pool of money that Battery Park City needs is also the land lease and the civic fees. into that pool along with the pilot tax, correct?
I'm sorry.
No,
The land lease money is in that pie.
no, not, well, yes,
Which land?
the ground lease is she's
Ground
talking
lease.
about.
She's talking about the revenues.
Oh,
You're talking
for
about revenue
revenues.
now.
Got it, yeah. So, right, each of the agreements that we have with the 42 buildings,
So the problem with Battery Park City real estate right now is there is so many step-ups in the cost of land lease that nobody's buying apartments here. You've got a ticking time bomb in 7 years on some of the buildings, 2040 on the other buildings. And we can't sell an apartment right now, a one-bedroom over $2,000 a month plus a mortgage. Tack on another couple $100,000 and forget the renovation of the hallway or a potted plant in the lobby, you can't afford anything.
So, what,
So you've got a slush fund, we have to lobby hard for Battery Park City to adjust the land lease. It's one thing about the pilot tax, yes, but that's a citywide item. Our major problem is buyers look at land lease before they crap about the pilot or the taxes.
okay, we're
so
not,
when
we're
you
gonna,
say, I want to make sure that I'm capturing this and conveying it properly tomorrow. So when you say the land lease, you mean the lease that we have with the developer of your building, is that right?
The ground rent.
The condo boards each have a
Yep.
ground lease
Yep,
and a civic fee
got it.
that's itemized
Got
under
it.
common.
That's the one you're
Touch,
referring to.
yes.
Got it, okay. Thanks.
all right, we're gonna let that sit.
I'm totally confused, so I just wanted to clarify again. Pilot is the taxes and they're established by the city.
Correct.
Payment in lieu of tax.
They
So
track the
based on,
city.
like a home, it's assessed value times a rate, and it comes up with a number that hopefully when they add it all together pays for everything for the city.
Right,
Okay. And then on top of that, we have ground rent.
Yes.
And
yes.
how's that established?
That's each building,
Including rental and
Yes,
non.
each,
right.
each, every time each property was developed, an individual negotiation took place between the authority and the developer to set the value of the land and the ongoing escalation of the cost of the
Okay, that's
rent
like the
of,
12%
or the land lease, yes.
Okay. And the pilot is everybody, including like Gateway pays pilot.
Everybody. And Gateway everybody pays ground rent, except the city which owns Stuyvesant.
Right.
Everybody else, Goldman Sachs, Conrad,
The tax list and the.
Like MJH pays $1 a
ground
year,
rent
there was some exception.
Plus some other stuff is the total amount of money that Battery Park City Authority collects.
Correct. Go back to the
They
picture.
give, it says they have pilot revenue versus transfers to New York City, which is a percent of the pilot. Don't they transfer the whole pilot?
they do, but it's broken. The revenue is broken, that's what that shows. So if you look, the pilot is the one on the left,
The blue?
the blue, and it's broken down into New York City pilot and then the 20%, 19, which is transfers to New York City as a percentage of the pilot to fill the other buckets.
This is a composite of these two together, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
That's
it's
what
all
I understand.
census.
I don't
But it's
believe
all
it.
census.
It's not
I don't believe
total.
it is. If you sum 42 and 135, you don't get 205.
Right, but the pilot is one, the transfer, but some,
But this is subtracting your expenses with the authority's expenses. That's why it doesn't make 200%, right?
and it doesn't qualify
66
with what goes
plus
to the
20
state either.
Not including the percentage that Battery Park City.
And doesn't pilot also go to the state?
So that,
It does
that
not.
money has to go. There's no.
Well, what we're saying is that there's excess revenue. So,
That's the excess
The
revenue.
excess revenue comes from what?
Comes from all of us.
Why is there
portion
excess
is
money?
asking?
Why is there excess money? The pilot is taxes and we owe it to the city to pay them.
But that's not
Yeah,
how
but
it's
that's,
broken out.
the way that it works is different. So that gets back to the first comment that I made, which is we collect the pilot and the ground rent together.
Right.
It's one check from the Urine Gateway.
Right.
Yeah, so the not Left Rack, but
Yeah,
subsidiary of
Left
Left
Rack.
Rack cuts a single check that's a composite of those two numbers,
Right.
the pilot and the ground rent, and it goes into our big pot, for lack of a better term. And so we don't keep, to my knowledge, and maybe Pam will tell you folks differently in February, but to my knowledge, we don't keep the pilot funds and the ground rent funds segregated. Once they become our revenues,
Right.
they're collected.
And then how much do you give to the city? Don't you
Well,
have
Everything that we haven't spent on ourselves, which is to say our operating budget and the debt service.
So last year, they spent on themselves $123 million.
There was about 195 excess revenue that goes to New York City General Fund and the Joint Purpose Fund.
Okay, this is what's
So
left.
there's no money left for us, beside what you, the
We
Battery Park City.
take
Authority.
for us first.
When you say us, you mean Battery
Park
Park
City.
City Authority.
But when you say left for us, you mean, what's the pool that we could pull on? What Tammy said was, the pool that we possibly could pull on is the money that's sent to the Joint Purpose Fund.
So you want to pull back, okay.
They
All
wanna
the
pull
money,
back money.
all the money, okay, you spend.
Wouldn't it be great, let's say they're giving $41 million to the Joint Purpose Fund, since there's no deadline that they have to fulfill that requirement to fill the fourth bucket, what if they only gave them $5 million?
Right.
And it took another 10 years to fill the last two buckets? Who cares from our perspective? Because you could take then, instead of the $41 million that they're gonna pay in, maybe they only take $5 million, and the other $36 million is done as a decrease to land lease. Right?
And we could also cut what the Battery Park City Authority spent.
Well, that's a different conversation that you can bring up with Pam and BJ. I'm not going there, sorry. Does-
Cut what we spend in order to send more to the city?
No,
That's what-
no, no, no,
that's-
no.
Say what
But
you
that's
do.
what happens,
No,
that's
she's being
where,
sorry.
Got it.
so many things that they've said over the years make no sense to me, and slowly they do. What they talk about is basically what's not spent here, it goes to the city.
Right.
So the conversation isn't necessarily what they spend here.
No.
The conversation is, how much can we claw back that they're giving to the city?
Right.
Or lower
Well,
expenses
look-
and not send as much to the
Well,
city.
that's why I'm
Well, no,
wondering.
well,
if you-
Increase
That's why you asked the
It's,
question.
no, the
Is there
question
more
is,
that you have
the
to
question is
spend?
to increase the expenses of the, from the revenue pool, so we're not giving as much to the city, and to decrease the costs. It's a dual conversation, because what we're basically saying is, we're happy to pay not happy, but we understand that as New York City residents, you have to pay your taxes to live here. That's not the question. The question is, why are we paying so much more than is needed? And that's the question. And if there's no end date on the 2010 agreement for when that bucket has to be filled, then we potentially have a space to turn around and say, listen, instead of 40 million to satisfy this for the next 2 years, how about you take 5? Who cares if it's another 10 years to satisfy it, other than the elected officials who all want the money?
Which is why, again, that would be the place to look at when you're saying, I got back again,
So-
30 million is enough to collect, and then where it would come from would be the money that goes to the Joint Purpose Fund. That's
So-
a simple way to look at it.
Once we have the updated financials next month, we will look at doing a resolution to go to the city and state controller, the governor and the mayor and the Battery Park City Authority that qualifies, that says, enough, you have no end date on this bucket agreement, so therefore, let's lower the amount that's there, give a break, rebalance the community, and give us the next 50 years that we're looking to try and accomplish some kind of equity across the board for condo owners, so they're not forced out,
Yeah.
for renters, so they're not forced out. There has always been, it's just gotten out of control, but there's a way to do it. And I have to have faith that the Battery Park City Authority is working with conversations that we cannot be privy to because they're private negotiations. But there has to be some kind of structured thing that they're working on. But we need to be able to do a resolution, to move it forward, to be able to say, that's it.
There's two issues that the board, the committee should consider, and then also what questions we can send ahead of time for the BPCA to prepare, and what questions that I can send ahead of time to the controller's office, so they can also advise us and be prepared for the conversation that we'll have with them as well. The two
Yeah.
related but separate issues are, one is the size of the pie, and that's the ground rent related issue that you all are,
Yeah.
it seems like the committee is, for the most part, talking about balancing the expenditures that the Battery Park City Authority needs to make and the amount of ground rent it takes to get to that, and minimizing the amount of overage in order to, but the other side of it is, what is produced that goes towards the settlement agreement and whatever's negotiated for the next agreement, how do those buckets improve the livelihood or the quality of life
Or the
and
financial-
infrastructure investments of the people who live in Battery Park City as well. That we know that there's not a lot of money for affordable housing spent within this district, and I can tell you that because there are very few numbers of affordable units produced, because I see the numbers. It's just a built-out neighborhood that isn't being upzoned anytime soon, because most of it's already at the maximum state allowed floor area limit. So, you know, there has to be a way for us to see how that money comes back, since you all are producing it. There's, you know, it's worthwhile request. So those are the two different areas that I think you, the committee, can certainly pursue at the same time.
So anybody who needs further clarification on this, I encourage you to take a look. There are resources out there. If you need to know what they are, please reach back to the community board. We can get you the presentations, or to Nick Spordone, who's here. He can send you the open community meeting, which had the same slides that I pulled here, okay? So when we talk to Pam and BJ in February, we have better, you know, 2 different lines of questioning. And then in March, we can sit together outside of the financial thing, once everybody's had a chance to absorb, and write the resolutions and get it done, and start really advocating the controller's office to come and hear us.
Yeah.
And pledge maybe not to sign on to another one of these things until.
Correct.
2 points before we end.
Please do.
I think there are 2 things that have been implicit, at least maybe, in my comments that I just want to make sure that are explicit prior to your talking to BJ and Pam next month, just so everyone's on the same page. The first is that the city has a repurchase option, which is to say that to buy the authority, they need to cut us a check for $1 and to purchase our debt. And so, and if anyone thinks that buying the Battery Park City Authority's debt, if you're the city of New York, is a challenge, you should take a look at the balance sheet of the city of New York.
Yeah.
They could do it in a heartbeat. But so when we talk about, oh, why don't you, you know, considerably, say, for instance, jack up your operating budget, or why don't you blow your capital plan out of the water? It's a real concern among the management team of the authority that one day we could get the email that says, in fact, we're going to purchase you folks, and the sterling, and I can't say this enough, the sterling staff of the Parks Department would then become the City Parks Department. And who knows, you know, whether the level that and I think that the team at the authority does such a phenomenal job, and we could spend an entire meeting talking about that, but I think they do such a terrific job, and I'm not so confident that absent the team that we have in place, that the level and quality of craftsmanship that you see in the parks and the maintenance of the community would be held to such a high standard. That's one thing. Thing number 2 is I just want to make sure that when we talk about the sort of levers that we have, it's important just to remember that, and I mean this particularly as it pertains to the rental buildings, but to all, that we do have ground leases with all of these buildings, which is to say contractual obligations. So it's not like one day, you know, you're successful in shrinking the pie, it's only, you know, it's going to be capped at $300 million, what have you. Next thing you know, all of the developers are going to pass that benefit along to the residents. We have these contractual obligations with the ground tenants. So again, I can't stress to you enough the priority of the authority to make Battery Park City more inclusive economically, but I just want to make sure that everyone recognizes that we still have these contractual obligations, and as anyone who lives or has been close to the negotiation with Gateway knows, these negotiations are super, super challenging, and they're not quick feats. And so this is a priority of ours, but it's not a simple one.
I better understand.
All right. We can go over it in February when we're with Pam and
I can
BJ.
also ask you afterwards.
Yeah.
too.
All right. It's, Matt, I'm sorry, I'm not going to recognize you because we're going to close it down at 7:27 of this topic. It's been an hour and 10 minutes. We'll talk about it again next month because we have the financial. So bring your questions for there, please. Yeah, I did. But we're going to go super from here. So thank you very much, Eric. You did an amazing job.
Eric.
Do you want to take it from here?
Well, Nick's going to get yelled at anyway.
Whatever Tammy thinks.
Hit my,
best of the
yeah.
luck.
So,
I got it.
because we know of quorum, we're gonna hit to the plaque. So what we know, we've had lots of discussions in Battery Park City lately about the memorials. Oh, you even brought
I
it.
told you I brought it. Okay, want me to get a quick history?
No,
You let me know when, I can get the
so
whole.
you can park yourself down.
Okay.
So we have an article, it starts way back after 9/11. So we have lots of memorials in Battery Park City. American Express has one for their employees in the lobby. Many of the corporate people have one. There is one for the Battery Park City Authority people who lived and worked here pre and during and post 9/11. That's part of South Cove, is a permanent memorial, which you can see on their site. We are getting a hurricane memorial for Puerto Rico, and we are getting a Mother Cabrini memorial. We have the Amazing Police Memorial, and we have the Irish Hunger Memorial. We do celebrate the Tunnels of Towers every year. It is a permanent location that will not change from what we understand. So there's lots of things. The funny conversation is much like at the World Trade Center site, it has only been a conversation of residents, seems to be like, oh yeah, and people lived here. So Udi Gupta wrote this fantastic article after 9/11 to say, don't forget there are many people who actually live around here. We have copies of it, which I'm happy to share. I shared it online with the committee as well. We'll pass that out. There used to be in the Regatta a plaque, which Nick now has in his hands.
Back when there was a community room in the Regatta, there was a plaque, you'll see our kind of old logo here. It's a list of names of the individuals, I'll send it to you,
So,
that perished in the 9/11 attack.
so the one thing that has not been discussed, but is very relevant and prevalent, is the fact that not only you hear about the Victims' Compensation Fund and how people are affected and you can go, but that there is a continuing dialogue for the first responders and the residents, and most recently the news reporting about the high school students and the children born in the neighborhood that year about continuing health issues. And yet there are many people who not only perished on 9/11 who lived here, but who have continued beyond that point. There's been a recent movement in the kind of general understanding of people saying, well, maybe this should be looked at, maybe this kind of stuff should be, kind of analyzed. What happened to all the kids who were from the local schools and the teachers who worked in the area and things like that. So when we walk around, and there are lots of conversations around it, one of the things that sort of sticks in my craw and several others, how long was it until we got the memorial glade at the World Trade Center site honoring the people who lived here? Right? It was recent. It was this past year that was done. And yet in Battery Park City, a 92-acre campus with beautiful memorials and everything, there is nothing that represents the people who lived here. The plaque used to be inside the community center. Well, when they no longer had the lease at the Regatta, it's been sitting in the offices of the Battery Park City Authority. Period. So the question and dialogue to look at this evening is how people feel about this. And do we want to ask for and insist, I'm sorry, it's so gracious that you have put all these other things, but maybe we should really actually have something about the people who live here and really make sure that people recognize that not only now when you're looking at the brand shiny new buildings, but people have lived here for a long time. And recognize not only those that passed, but somehow, if people agree on it, a commentary about the continuing and how that should look and what that dialogue is. And that's what this topic is about, is not only the fact that I'm sort of irritated that the plaque's just sitting, I actually don't think I'd like it up in this community room either, because it's not a permanent installation anywhere. And everybody else has a nice permanent installation. Why shouldn't the residents who live here have a permanent installation somewhere? So that's my soapbox. I'm now off. I'm going to open it up to the board. I'm going to start with Kathy, and then Matt and Nick, welcome to the fray.
Hello. Sorry I'm late, folks, thank you though.
Kathy goes first.
Apology accepted, Nick.
Yeah, hard to know where to even start, but just to introduce myself a bit, I'm one of the original residents. I've been here since '82. Our apartment was demolished to an extent that we were displaced for 8 months. I've served on several planning committees for the museum, and if you go over and see the exhibits, you'll see an antique chair from our apartment, and I appeared on MSNBC's special that ran for months and months that fall, and my husband took it upon himself to write this piece. I think when we came back to the community, there were any number of people who were just immensely grateful that the conditions in this community were spoken about at all in the media, because I think, we got very little visibility for what everybody went through here. So there are a number of issues. One is, I'm still moved to tears when I go up to PS 89 and I see a plaque commemorating what the leadership of that school did. And it wasn't just in honor of people who died. It was about what it took to hold it together for a year or two or even 5 years. So that for me is what should be acknowledged. That real people lived here, that 20,000, however many thousand people in the immediate list community were displaced. A year later, there were still 1,000 people out of their homes. There were ongoing health issues. There were people who died. There were, really heroic things done by people on behalf of their neighbors and restoring community. So for me, what happened in this neighborhood should be mentioned. It should be public, and it should be part of the ongoing national dialogue about what happens in the aftermath of any kind of major emergency. I'm sure that people who have gone through hurricanes in the South face that. The help we got from other people in the country, including like the Southern Baptist relief teams, and that's it. It's the story, for some reason, has just never had, the visibility that it deserves, and it's past time, especially as other memorials enter the community. And I'd love it if there's some water someplace here. Just kind of hang around. Go ahead.
Okay. So we're going to do the board first, and then we'll get, anybody have any overall thinkings on this?
I just would say I agree with what's been said already. I don't have any specific thoughts, but I agree with the idea.
Jeff?
I just think, I hear what you're saying, but if this is a conversation about a plaque, I don't know that you can tell a whole story with a plaque. And I don't know what we want in a way. Like acknowledgement of it could be very generically written in a way that honors lots of people's heroic efforts to put others before themselves and get children to safety and all that. And there's a whole other element of rebuilding, which we've done down here. It's a large story, and I think sadly, people sitting, as you just mentioned, in Puerto Rico right now, where there's been a terrible earthquakes and other obviously kind of issues there. I think communities have traumas, they go through them, and people don't always pay attention to them. We're in this community, and I get that. I don't mean to say something unpopular, but what we went through obviously shifted the nation in a lot of directions that I think have been horrific for the nation, starting illegal wars and things like that. Now it's used as a premise for that. But I feel like it's a really complex, huge story we're talking about here. And I'm not sure that a plaque can begin to do justice to that story. So I'm not sure what we're debating really. But
So that's kind of the feeling I think that many of us have. And the question is, there's a unique opportunity that we have that we hadn't thought of, because let's be frank, there's going to be a full redesign of Wagner. They're knocking everything down as part of resiliency, and they're rebuilding, and they're building a brand new building over there. Why? There's nothing that doesn't say that either part of the contemplative gardens or part of the building. We've not had a conversation and a request on this, but I would agree with you. I think a plaque is not. And so that's why we wanted to bring this up, because please don't be offended when I say this. That's all we had, and it hasn't been up in value for a while. But the real question is, what do we want?
And I would say that in the modern era we're living in, I really love what you were just saying. Any space that could be dedicated to begin to tell the story, it's a dynamic story that continues to
persists.
Yeah.
Right.
And B, we don't have to think in the old ways of like an embossed plaque or engraved in place. It could be that as a start, but you can link all kinds of things to modern technology. So people can like use a QR code and they can have a live platform where people are telling the story of what they've done in place of it. There can be political dialogue around it. I mean, these are all possibly controversial ideas. But I just think the idea of a singular plaque to commemorate what people did is just, it's so limiting and so not possible to capture the narrative that I don't really know.
No, I would agree.
I'm sure you
I don't think it
agree.
needs
I'm
to
sure
be
we're
a
not
plaque,
disagreeing.
but and I'll remind everybody that there's a 20th anniversary coming up, believe it or not.
Right.
And we should have that on our horizon as well. But it just seems so ironic to me that almost every other entity down here is acknowledged in some way, and the people
We're
who
not.
live
No,
here are not.
It's a really cool point, and I think part of what I've sort of been silent about is because of what Jeff said right now, is because what do we want? What a great idea, Tammy. There is a possibility of something, because
Yeah,
that's going to be.
residents were evacuated from 3 major
Oh, yeah.
locations
And
across
Blackhawk
Battery
was
Park
one of
City.
them, or down there
Wa-
was.
Rockefeller, the Marina,
Yep.
South Cove,
South
and
Cove.
down by Wagner.
Yeah.
It's wherever people could pull a boat, people
And
jumped.
people pulled the boat,
And
and all of these.
I
people
don't
need to
think
be
that,
recognized.
I think that the story of the rebuilding and the looking at the future of our success, we are the shiny penny, and we
Yeah.
are a real good example of what teamwork, community, and rebuilding can look like, but you don't know how devastated it was
No, and-
unless you represent the success and show both sides.
And show both sides. I also think that enough time has passed that maybe the visceral, and although I'm crying as you're talking about it, so who knows, but the visceral trauma that so many people suffered, and a lot of the children, they're quiet and silent because they are traumatized by it.
Yeah.
I mean, my daughter, my younger one was born 2 weeks later, so no, she got no clue. The older one, no, she's traumatized by it still to this day. And it may be difficult to see something.
Betty, what do you think?
You don't want to talk to me.
Okay. And we're gonna open it up to public. Matt, okay, Matt, you're first.
I would suggest that all of you consider the possibility of an eternal flame. I would also suggest, without sarcasm, although this would sound sarcastic, if there's a plaque, it should contain the words, "The air is safe to breathe and the water is safe to drink." And I would also suggest that the authority take responsibility on an ongoing basis for maintaining a log of everybody who is going to die in this community from these illnesses and add those names as that happens. And you're going to need a big plaque. And that's it.
I would say fountain instead of an eternal flame.
Could be both.
You know,
Whatever,
you know,
yeah.
where
But
seating
that's a
area
really
where
good
people
point.
could congregate, kind of like what you have at Washington Square Park.
It's a great idea.
'Cause, yeah,
Go ahead.
So I'm sorry, I'm going to be controversial, but every time, we have so many death memorials in our neighborhood. And we have all the acreage across the street to this element and the museum, wherever they might, tribute museum, wherever they might fall. But I prefer that when we're touring our friends, families, and potential residents, that every turn isn't another memorial. And I wish that we could get a cap on the number of memorials that the government can put in our neighborhood.
How about a few tennis courts?
Yeah. I mean, the question, but the question for what we're talking about is something that commemorates rebirth, right? Something that commemorates not only destruction, but we built a neighborhood in this community, ground up, twice. Let's be real. That's really what this area is, because having been here on 9/11 and sitting in Battery Park with the National Guard, waiting with the sign for when you can walk to the buildings, or waiting at Houston, which was the other place, and then you got golf carted down, right, into the north end. Those were right, those were your only two options, and it wasn't that way for a day, wasn't that way for a week, you know, it was
Years.
that way for
Years.
months, and for some people in some buildings, it was even longer. So, but I kind of like, for me, I agree, a plaque is just a plaque, but I would love to talk about in part of the first 50 years and the next 50 years. In the first 50 years, this community has been built twice. It has. And so I love an eternal flame and a fountain, because I like things that symbolize the life and the rebirth in a garden that shows about what the future is with resiliency. That's kind of where I was, because we're talking about having not only, the whole new Wagner Park will be a very, very forward-thinking, different look. Whether we agree with it or not, it still is a forward-thinking progression. And so we can take all of this, we can even include pictures of the old park in moving forward with it, to have it really show the growth of where we are. And you have to honor both ends of that, I think. That's me. Jeff?
So is
Justine?
there, given what you were just saying, is there not, I've yet to have the courage to go to the 9/11 Memorial Museum. So there's no section or subsection in that museum that talks about this community? Because that's an insane oversight.
There's some, and I'm happy to take anybody who would like to go and feels like
Is
they
there
would.
not a whole subsection or area or?
There's the last room has a corner exhibition case. It's got air purifiers, photos, my chair, doors with the fire department markings on them. And there's audio of different, some members of the community board actually talking about repairing things. But relative to the scale of everything that happened, it's small. And they have just recently started to address the health issues, which were barely mentioned at all when it opened. And right now, there are as many people who have died from ongoing health issues as on the day of, and there's going to be multiple times more.
And there's also nothing that talks about the rebirth of the neighborhood.
Well,
That talks about, it shows a bit of, it's a corner, it's like a chair in an auditorium, I guess is the best way that I could explain the size.
So I guess I would say, again, at the risk of being insensitive, just so for full transparency, I moved here in February of 2002, and I lived in the East Village, and my wife watched the buildings be hit by planes from across the city. And we moved here before there were any incentives or anything like that. We moved here because we wanted to be downtown. We didn't move here because there's a cheaper rent, because you guys have to recall there's like a 2-year program giving you cheaper rent and all that. We didn't move here, we moved here and then that happened, so obviously it was a nice thing that happened, but that's not why we moved here. So it's been about 20 years for me, 18. So to me it feels a little bit like it's not just Battery Park City, it's affected all of Lower Manhattan. People live all around Lower Manhattan. So I'm not so sure about why we would only focus on just Battery Park City when all Lower Manhattan is. I get that we were the most residential area at that time, the Five Guys grown, but all Lower Manhattan was threatened by that.
Justine?
I think it's interesting that you said we built this community twice. And I find it really poignant, and I think that actually this dialogue is important because it's infuriating to me that having rebuilt this community twice, we're being forced out for price.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that needs to be tied, and not to the memorial part of it, but to discussion. That needs to be made very well aware. All the people who lived here, who were forced out because of who lived here that day and planned to be here for a long time, who are forced out for finances. And that's something that just speaks to me, that we rebuilt it and now we're getting kicked out. It's like,
Victim
yeah,
of your
thanks,
own
see you,
success.
bye.
I just wanted to, when you said rebirth, this might be cliche, but I thought of a phoenix, phoenix rising out of the ashes, so thinking of doing a sculpture.
Phoenix,
I mean, there's lots of opportunities and ideas. Betty?
Okay, I'll be a super insensitive person. I spent my years working in the War Victims Fund, where I worked only in places where millions of people died, where there was no money for rebuilding. So excuse me if I'm a little blasé, because I lived with lots of people who lived with all of this. In Uganda, where millions of people were killed. In Rwanda, where 800,000 people were slaughtered with machetes by neighbors over like a 3-month period. Those are bigger traumas to me. They have no memorials. Vietnam, where there's no ground anywhere where someone wasn't shot and killed. I mean, everybody's family member was killed. when you put things in perspective, I want you to look at, there are a lot of people who came here from other countries through horrific conditions to sit and listen to people who, they're sympathetic to how bad that day was and the period after, but it's nothing compared to what they lived through. Nothing. So I think the real question is this to be a catharsis for the people who are physically here at that time? Or is it to be something that really speaks to the event, in which case you're looking at it is more than just Battery Park City? Two, I know, because I hear from my building too, we're the first owners of our space, but we keep being told, well, we built the city twice. Well, obviously we didn't build it because we weren't here. I don't realize the negative being told to people in other parts of the city that they're non-contributory and they don't count because they weren't here in 2001. I don't want to send that message through what it is. I think more discovery of what it is, because yes, and I've guessed over there, like, what is this, one big funeral tomb? I mean, what is it?
No, that's why I'm talking about, I'm talking about rebirth. I'm talking about
but is it a
the
rebirth
building.
to everybody? That's why I want, how do you put that
It is
in
a rebuild of a
perspective?
full community neighborhood, yeah.
To some people, yes.
But
that's
even
the
you
point.
being a first owner is part of the rebirth process.
Then it's not exclusionary of you, it's part.
It's actually, it's
to rebuild
inclusive
it.
because you're part of the success of
Yeah.
how this worked and how we are
People
here.
don't perceive that, is what I'm saying is the problem.
But that's part of the problem, is that it hasn't been a conversation, and it.
Because it usually stops at one day. But we're talking about a growth perspective look at it.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think there needs to be more discussion of what is intended by the people who want it. Because I understand who wants it, but for them to really discuss really what do they want and who is offended, as well as who says gets a catharsis from it, as well as those who are
Catharsis,
okay.
no. I mean, talking about it, I'm crying at this meeting.
Well, that's what I
It's
mean.
not
That's
catharsis, no, it's upsetting, it's triggering, it's PTSD. But I also think that there's a bit of education. How do we avoid this from ever happening again? And what can we do as a country and as people? I mean, I'm on this community board because of 9/11.
So-
Because I got involved because people tried to kill us. because
And I
of what our country
kind
did.
of look at, when we're talking about a memorial that honors kind of the residents of the community, is I look at it as actually a very symbolic, a very symbolic thing, because you had, we'll use the staff from the Battery Park City Authority who were here day of and every day after. There were some people who like slept in offices who helped rebuild, right? There's a beautiful note and memorial to that. There are people for the community who had the same thing, of all cultures, all races, it didn't make a difference who you were all even that day. And you were even,
It was such.
it was a really, and the coming together and the
So
helping of
beautiful.
people helping to get other people to get their pets
It was-
out.
it-
People,
beyond the initial horror,
you know,
it was
people
beautiful.
coming back and forth who were with, who were doctors or vets or who were residents who went and went the extra mile. There was so much that was so positive in the darkest of times of the people who lived here and across Lower Manhattan. I mean, it's what gave rise to Wall Street Rising and many other things in LMDC and many things that were very contributory to the rebuild. But that's part of where I think we can honor. We should, this community in particular was harder hit than many others, even in Lower Manhattan, because of being isolated and physically removed. You know, you had one building that was, the face of it was completely blown in and unoccupiable. So
My
there's,
apartment.
yeah. So I mean, there are stories to be told to understand so when you walk down, you can see and appreciate the beauty. It's like people who come and visit and say, I'm looking for Ground Zero. I'm sorry, we don't have Ground Zero. Are you looking for the World Trade Center campus? It's right over there. But to understand, there's no place that I have seen that shows the history of the rebirth of the neighborhood. Twice. We talk about it from the beginning of the creation of Battery Park City Authority, and there's a blip in the middle, and then we keep going. But there's no place that actually shows kind of what it was that I found. Kathy and then Jeff.
Yeah, I'll try and be quick. I mean, for me, it's all about context. I
Yeah.
also would love to walk out of my home and not see memorials everywhere. We have a friend who got his PhD on the topic of memorialization, and he's British and he's no longer with us, but he paid a visit and said, do you realize how heavy this neighborhood is?
Yeah.
It's like there are memorials everywhere. It's like so out of proportion to anywhere else in the world. And
And that study was before the 2 new ones.
Yeah, so as long as we're in a context of acknowledging events and accepting memorials to events that have happened elsewhere, it just seems to me that there's a glaring gap. And within that gap, there are 2 issues. One is rebirth and rebuilding, and the other is, the ongoing illnesses and death of people who were impacted. And I'm very, very glad that the adjunct to the memorial and the glade is there, but it's very anonymous. If you were coming to visit, you would not know the scale of what has happened and that it impacted people right here. So it's Jeff.
Jeff and then Judith.
Go ahead.
I mean, I was just gonna say, I agree that it would be nice to have something. Is it worth putting in the same resolution? I mean, it kind of seems, in a way, it seems wrong to do this, but is it worth putting in the same resolution that we should cap the memorials at some point? Because, it just keeps kind of going on, and I
We've
just
already
wonder-
done a reso on that, asking the governor to look elsewhere.
And
And the community board passed it fully, saying, listen, there's enough, go find another place
Right, I remember
in Lower
that.
Manhattan,
Right.
but
But then we read
That was tone deaf.
resolution saying we wanted the memorial.
Right, that's, I guess that's what I'm.
because it had no,
Unless
it
we
had,
want something more.
so
Yeah.
the conversation that we had is, we said without context,
Okay.
is that it was a memorial put in Battery Park City without having anything to do with Lower Manhattan.
Right.
It was non-contextual.
Irish potato family didn't have to.
Well, welcome to leadership.
Well,
Yes.
I didn't get to speak.
Oh, sorry, Jeff didn't finish, I apologize.
I mean, I kind of appreciate Betty taking the chance to go into dangerous territory, but I think the question she framed are really important. Like, what's the point of the memorial? Is it to memorialize? Is it to open the conversation? You talked about, being on the board because of instead of being politicized by the event.
Yeah.
That gets into a whole realm that we're at right now with, another corrupt president seeking another illegal war to benefit the stock market so his friends can make lots of money off war. And that's what's going on right now. That's why that happened. That happened because because the first Bush started a war and they wanted revenge. Like, that's clearly why it happened. Like 10 years later, they got their revenge. And so now we're opening ourselves. It's like, this is America. This is
But
what
that's
our
the
country
question,
does.
is
We
to
create
frame it.
wars to create markets. And so it becomes very political. And so is it about opening a political dialogue? Obviously, I'm offering an opinion. It's not factual. I'm sure that people disagree with me, but it is something you would be debating. It's an open conversation. It's not
That's a good thing.
open and shut, like, oh, this is what's,
I just
so
wanna make
what's
sure-
it for? Is it for dialogue? Is it
So,
for
I want to
making
make
us feel
sure,
better
Jeff,
because we
let me
help
answer
rebuild
that
the
question.
community?
I want to make sure that we're not at a point that we are, when you look at something like the 4-Point Street co-naming, all right? We went through, there's 5 points, is it 5 points it's called? Okay, so 5 Points was an incredibly important part of the history of Lower Manhattan, and it has been completely wiped out through development.
Right.
So, for people who do historic tours, there is one building and one corner that remains. What I'm looking to have contextually is to have context, not have it be just a memorial where people come and grieve, but have context to what the rebirth and all of it is, which could potentially provoke a dialogue. It'd be really bizarre for people to be standing in Wagner, right? At the edge of Wagner near the Jewish Heritage Museum, look up to see how far Tower 1 is to understand that people evacuated off that tip. Which
So
I
that's
don't,
the kind of thing
those
that
kinds
is-
of
That's
things.
the kind of thing that matters to you, but it just doesn't, that's not gonna matter to an audience 50 years from now. That's just how it is. People survive and go on, they move on, they scrap together, they go on. The story you want to be told over and over just won't be eventually, is one thing I'd say. And I think it's also ironic that we started our conversation about rents and how people are being forced out. You could argue the legacy of rebuilding Lower Manhattan is driving out the middle class. I mean,
gave me
that's,
an idea,
it's
though.
amazing we're having the same two conversations.
Well,
You just talked about
that's-
overdevelopment, wiping away 5 points. Overdevelopment is wiping away.
It's wiping away us.
There's not, almost none of
Maybe
the
we should get a
spaces
plaque
here
over
are
each of
about
our
community
apartment
involvement.
doors.
Pier 1's a giant bar. Pier A is a giant bar. We want that to be something completely different. It's a giant bar for a bunch of millennials to have loud conversations.
I have a thought.
So it's like the legacy of And some
Okay.
levels is exactly what you just described, overdevelopment, wiping away, diversity
Betty.
in the community.
You brought out a thought in what you said, though. What might be kind of interesting, if you want to have something that speaks to the community and the experience of the moment at the time, but doesn't take up a lot of space, you get tired of seeing this. What about doing one of those where you can have on your phone, where they can have spots put up, such as one on the Irish Monument, we have, this is where the fire relief people, this is where they rested, this is where they got. It's the many different sites that had meaning at the time. This is where, they were.
You can
and-
attach it into the wayfinding.
Exactly. And I said, put it into that, so people could do a 9/11,
Geotag,
in
something
the
similar
day.
to that, like Allied does.
And that's
History
history,
walk.
dynamics,
So it might
it's
be
not
very
so much
interesting.
in your face, and people who choose to participate, and people who choose not to, don't.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a good idea. I think,
Yeah.
I still think potentially the idea of a fountain or a
Yeah, would
garden
be
or
nice
something is
if
nice
it's
because
simple.
if it's about community, then maybe it's nice to have a place where community can gather.
Well, you could start or end there as a
Yeah,
place
right.
where people
Yeah,
reflect on the experience.
Well,
That
was
would
your
be-
initial idea.
So
Okay.
I
These ideas
actually-
of gardens, the gardens should have
Yeah.
something.
Yes.
Just for the idea that people aren't going to be necessarily talking about this 50 years from now, I think that people 50 years from now will be talking about whatever we today decide is worth remembering.
That's a good point.
I didn't mean
So-
to say quite as
No,
I
no,
said.
no, I-
but,
I
like,
understand
It
the
won't be
point you're
as
trying to make.
visceral as people pass away.
Of course not, but in the same way as we look back at World War II memorials today, it's because people post that era and in the era afterwards decided these are things worth remembering. And we don't necessarily in this country remember a lot of things that we should.
Yeah.
So it's what we decide today that.
This is where I like what you're saying because
So I love-
the World War II memorial in DC, for example, is such a cold,
Right.
such a cold memorial. It's a
Static.
bunch of reeds per spade. there's
So
no sense
let's
of
go back to
sacrifice.
where
Whereas
we.
this walking tour idea is like what happened.
It's a living, and it can
Let's
be.
be more modern in our thinking, less
Okay,
less
that's exactly
funereal,
where I was going.
funereal,
All right,
funereal,
Jeff.
more like
And
Jeff.
that's something that
So
can be
here's what I
updated.
think we should do. This would be my proposal. Based on the conversation we had tonight, that we do a sort of a work group for what it could look like. Because I agree, one thing does not say everything. And I love the idea of being able to geotag it, going through for people who want it or don't want it. We already have a wayfinding system, so if it ended up being QR codes or whatever technology, you're gonna have signage throughout the community anyway, so there are places and ways to enhance it. Who knows if the Downtown Alliance would be a partner with us on this kind of a conversation to take it broader through Lower Manhattan, right? There's no reason that we can't start it as a working group for a dialogue, and I would totally be in agreement that it could end in the garden area that the communities love, whether that garden area is in Rockefeller, or that garden area is in South Cove, or in the new area on Wagner. That could be part of a working group's decision and discussion, but it would be something that we could partner with the Battery Park City Authority to help figure out. So it is something that fits the tone and tenor of what we want, that celebrates the rebirth. And yeah, I mean, if we're all gone, then it'll be a nice testimony to.
Our
But-
kids can come back.
Yeah, our kids can come back. Oh yeah, my parents used to live here when it was affordable. So,
They could see it when you got the bid, they could see what it looks like today.
exactly. So there's
All
lots
I
of
think about that, I really love all that. I would just say about my thought earlier about Lower Manhattan, and for me it's a little personal in that my wife's best friend died because of exposure from her lungs within 2 years. She lived above where JR Musical used to be. So my point there being like it's not just us.
No,
So
it's
if
not
that's what we do, then that could be just us. It could be the story of Battery Park City on that fateful day and the following months. And that's something that people could be educated by, keep
So
the story alive
let's
in a
do
more
a
dynamic,
working-
modern
let's-
way. But that's not the same thing as saying our neighborhood hasn't been hurt. It's like this is the story of our neighborhood. They can
So,
other
my
neighborhoods can
que-
make their story, but it could be that's
Right.
our purview.
So for
that's
Nick
our-
and for
that's our
Eric,
committee with
would
Battery
you
Park
guys
City.
be open to a working group to develop a concept like this that we would work in tandem with the Battery Park City Authority to identify possibilities?
Happy to sit with you guys anytime and discuss. Sure. One thing I'll use is I'd say a shameless stuff bug, but it's not really shameless because we've talked to you guys about this, is we just recently released, Eric's team did a great job on our Battery Park City strategic plan, which many of you helped partake in planning. And one entire chapter is called Vibrant Public Space. One of the things that we want to do is make sure that the public spaces within Battery Park City are vibrant and accessible to audiences of all shapes and sizes, historical knowledge, different kind of
Yeah.
frames
Perfect.
and whatnot,
That's-
so.
So if you want to be involved, and members of the public can be involved as well, if you want to be involved in a working group that has this conversation, please reach out to Lucian, okay, at the community board office and say you'd like to work on a working group thing. This would be something in an ideal situation that the working group would be formed in February. This is an under 6-month kind of a conversation. This is fast.
It's gotta go
This is
quick,
something
yeah,
that we
I
would
agree.
get done and be friends and move forward with. Is everybody in agreement on that?
Yes.
I think it
Uh,
would be-
committee first.
Can we do daytime meetings by any chance?
Well, that'll depend on the working group, yes, but that would be the preference.
And then, and just to say too, also, if we do a good job and we can actually move forward, maybe to touch Jeff's point of other neighborhoods, maybe FIDI wants to jump on it in other neighborhoods, but again, later.
That's a working group conversation.
If you pass a resolution about this, I suggest you incorporate language specifying or calling upon the budget to be no less than the budgets for the other 2 memorials that the governor is inserting here without any,
And who's paying for that?
The governor,
we'll see.
yeah,
Actually, I have an idea on that too.
Mexico.
I'll tell you.
Mexico, that's funny. All right, so I think we're good.
We're gonna
We-
casually organize it.
We're going to organize this as a working group. If you are interested, by the end of January, so there is a deadline, the full board meeting is the 28th, I think, please email Lucian. If we get no one other than the 2 or 3 people who I know are already interested in this, then we'll go with 2 or 3 people and try, and again, this is not about belaboring the past, it's about thinking of a,
Future, but yeah,
Right.
and the ways to, yeah.
okay? All right,
Can I
so,
ask, with the bicycle working group, we also had non-board members on
That's
that?
what
Yep.
you're saying.
People
I
in the
did.
audience here want to be part of that?
I said that.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, I wanted
You were
to
yawning.
clarify that.
all right, so I think, I swear, I did say that.
Yes.
And it will end in a resolution based on our agreed values for it. All right, so I think we're good with that. Patrick, Mr. Patrick Murphy, are you still here or are you out? Oh, you're there, you go. You want to talk year over year? And then we're going to make you go fast, and then Nick's got updates. Before you leave, there are 3 meetings that are super important
So sweet,
that
Tammy.
you should know about before Patrick goes. There is on January 15th, the Southern Resiliency Plan, which will affect, yep, Justine's holding the flyer, the landscape from the top of Battery Park, historic Battery Park, by where the Museum of the American, it's not American,
Indian.
American, the Smithsonian Museum,
American Indian.
all the way across the top, passing Pier A, and all of Wagner. That conversation will be had in a full presentation with the Lower Coastal Manhattan Resiliency done by the city. That same conversation will happen on January 15th. Separate to that, there is the sustainability workshops that are organized by the Battery Park City Authority. It's a busy month in January for the community. If you are interested in talking about sustainability, which sustainability is not necessarily environmental resiliency, we're talking about affordability. We're talking about green initiatives. We're talking about aging in place, health care. You name it, it's a very wide thing. There are 2 dates, you don't have to go to both. One is the 16th and the other is the 22nd. I encourage anybody and everybody, please share it. The more participation we get in the community, the better the responses are. Thank you. Patrick, you're on.
Where is it going to be? Sorry.
Sorry, it's in River Terrace. You'll be seeing it in the pages of the broadsheet and other local newspapers soon enough.
Thank you, Patrick.
You're welcome. I'll put my back to it.
It's always the safest.
Okay, again, on the topics that were picked, graffiti, in 2018, there were 6 reports. This year, there were 10. It's just dealing with 2 locations, which was in Teardrop Park, the tunnel, so we finally got the graffiti off of it, and one was the ball-filled bathroom. Some people didn't like Trump, so we put it up in the bathroom.
You took it down?
Yes.
The Battery Park City Authority would like to convey that there are other ways to convey that message.
And go vote.
It is the right space.
Exactly, vote.
Go vote. That's what you have to do. Vote the left Wednesday.
Move
The
to
homeless-
Michigan and vote there.
The homeless situation in 2018 was 2 for this month. This year, this month was, December was 0. Lost and found property was 0 in 2018. We had 3 this month, December. Park rules was dead even for 18 and 19 at 9. Vendor solicitation, believe it or not, in 2018 was 10, and in 2019, 2. Dogs, 2018 was at 8 for December, and in 2019, we're down to 4. And that's it.
Well, winter is young, but I'd like to commend all the dog owners for minimizing their cutting down of the fence to let their dog roam free in a closed park. Thank you on behalf of the authority.
Our pleasure. Please make sure that Brookfield
Minimize.
closes
Minimize,
the
Small
lawn.
fence.
Please make sure Brookfield does the same consideration for their lawn and closes it off,
For
the oval lawn.
The overlawn.
Pump House Park. It's my understanding that soon construction will start on the oval lawn.
We never got a second.
He never came
presentation.
back and gave us a final update.
Wait, I thought that he did. Did he not?
He-
Twice.
He came, he didn't come the second time, and the last we heard was that he would come with final plans. After the final incorporated feedback, we have not seen
He
any.
should get you final plans.
That would be,
We'll make sure that that happens.
that'd be great. You could do that right before the financial presentation
We
in
had a lot
February.
of, we had a lot of comments.
Yeah. Thank you, Patrick. Nick, you have, thank you for coming. You made it. You got 6 minutes.
I don't even need 6 minutes.
4.
4 working days. But thank you, everyone. And again, sorry I'm late. As Tammy had noted, very busy week this week, obviously, and into next week. So each of the 4 prime days next week, we have something going on. Tammy very helpfully touched on 2 of the main ones, kind of infrastructure planning-wise. Wednesday night, South Battery Park City Resiliency. That's public meeting number 4. All the previous ones who want to catch up, the archive video and presentations from all of the previous meetings are on our website at epca/resiliency. Thursday night is the first of 2 sustainability roundtables. That's Thursday the 16th, and then the following Wednesday, 22nd. Tammy mentioned one thing. It has to do, you'll see on the flyer, it's like air quality, sustainability, and recycling. It's not affordability per se, but has so sustainability. The primary is environmental sustainability, affordability being another large topic that we are pursuing. Monday night, I'd be remiss unless I mentioned, we helpfully have these handouts for anyone here, the first in a series of sessions at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, which we're partnering on, which is part of our winter calendar, as you know. Artists, activists, and scholars in a series that explores the branding of women's bodies in the Holocaust and human trafficking generally. It's not exactly a light topic, but an important one in this time and space. That's the first in a series of them. We'll start January 13th, that's Monday, and then there are sessions in February and in March. Tuesday night is the first of our Tuesday talks. As you know, it's a very popular session here as part of our winter calendar. I have winter calendars for anyone who needs them, and if you want to get into our mailing list, let me know. Paul Wyckoff, who is a Battery Park City resident and the founder of, among other things, IAVA, the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, is hosting a talk on Tuesday night. He's the host of the Angry Americans podcast. That's at 6 River Terrace. So that's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of next week. I already saw that someone very helpfully spread these out, but this is new and very exciting as these things go. Birds of BPC, that's kind of cool. So Birds of Battery Park City. Okay.
My mother
That's actually, it's
fell.
really beautifully
She
done.
loved it.
Did we talk about it already?
And there's already a picture of the lily pond in here with our lovely dog.
Birds of BBC, all birds found in Battery Park City, which isn't just a nice thing to see, but it's also, as Eric had alluded to earlier, an incredible tribute to the work that our horticulturists do, Ann O'Neill, the whole operations team. They do a beautiful job to kind of foster an environment in which these species would be drawn. So kudos to them. Please enjoy. It will also be available on our website, available for downloads. You can print up a month at a time if you want. Again, Birds of Battery Park City, very exciting. That's most of what I have, and I'm sorry for, again, being late, but my formal report will be emailed and posted to our website in the next day or so.
Eric did a lovely job for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Could I just also
He's better
plug,
than
this
I am,
place 52 years ago didn't have any dirt of its own, and now there are over 300 different species that call Battery Park City home, humans among them.
Pretty cool.
Thank you.
Birds of BBC.
The humans, as we discussed.
Go ahead.
Today, during the state address, Como invited or said that he was expanding
Yeah,
the Jewish
that's what I was
Heritage
gonna say.
Museum. He said it 3 times.
Yes.
Saying that all school children from all over that's
yeah.
going to be coming to Battery Park City for educational trips.
Yeah, and he's mentioned Battery Park City?
Yeah,
Yes,
the
it
Museum of
has.
Jewish Heritage. That's 2.6 million public school students in New York State.
I'm not sure what the
Hopefully
expansion
not on the same
means.
Yeah,
it
they're not all coming on the
Battery
same
Park
day.
City's there? Are you
Did you
aware?
get those bathrooms?
Yeah, they are.
They are.
So while we're on that, how much public land are they going to take to expand that museum?
The question is, will this be a physical expansion of the building itself? For which so, and we are officially asking if this will be a physical extension, and if so, does there need to be an act of legislature because you would be removing parkland for other, that has been promised and utilized? So those are two questions that we would like answered. If there is a plan to expand it just programmatically during the school year on the days, then I request that you take a 432 look at Wagner and find bus parking. Because I don't know where you're gonna park, where you're gonna park the school buses. It's already an issue when they only have one or two. So logistically, I love that, but you gotta figure out where you're gonna park the buses.
All legitimate concerns. So the charge was delivered today in the state of the state, and as we have more details, we'll share them, and as always, be working closely with the community. I don't have more on it for now, other than to say that we should have more details soon.
Ask them at the same time if it's related to, are they going to bring the boat in that they had spoken about in the past? And if so, where they're going to put it and how is it going to be connected to the museum?
So the boat, there is a EDC, when it first did the Pier A contract with the Battery Park City Authority, there was a requirement for water usage at Pier A. When we spoke with the CEO of the Jewish Heritage Museum, he did not know that there was an option to be able to put said boat at Pier A, because no one had ever talked to him about it. So we did speak to him as a community board about that, and that option. I know that the Battery Park City Authority is looking for uses and people docking at Pier A, so that would be a really good question, because overall, the community and the design conversations, as BJ said, I'm not going to die on that one, did not want to dock at the end of Wagner. And water is not safe to go out on the west side in, according to the maritime people. So unless the plans are changing with Wagner from what's been presented as recently as last month, I did not see a dock on those plans.
Well, unless they're in the South Cove, which would actually be the closest in. But the question is, it'd be important to know if that's part of the expansion plan. I know there are a lot of objections to them being along where they block the view from Wagner Park. So looking for some more peripheral. So those were the concerns
Yeah,
in the past.
could they
that have
expand to
come up.
Pier A?
Or South Cove, yeah.
Yeah.
Either would be, South Cove would be pretty close for them to come from the museum out to the boat and back, would be the closest.
Boat of that size there.
I don't know. I just know that came up in discussion in the
Can't wait to
past
hear what the
at some
residents have to say about that one.
Parking issues, concerns? We'll
No.
expand the parkland. I'm just jotting down
Yeah.
the questions. And
Okay.
then
Anything else?
we'll be back with details.
So New York City has also put out that they're doing a placard enforcement. If you happen to notice any beneficial changes in the neighborhood, please let us know. We have yet to see one over on North Battery Park yet.
28 cars, front to back, on Tuesday.
Yeah.
All placards, yeah.
All placards.
Some, by the way, with forged, with a license plate number that was printed on the placard, crossed out, and a new one written in.
There were 35 on Monday and then one paraphernalia.
It's pretty brazen, because what I heard on New York One is they're supposed to get a fine for abuse, which is big, and then a fine for having parked. A double fine.
So Patrick, we'd love you to work your magic and see if maybe they can do a couple loops if you talk to the neighborhood
Fanciers.
patrol.
Yep.
That would be great. Thank you very much for everybody for attending. We are adjourned.